Hello everyone, my name is Ashish and you are watching another web channel, and in this video we are going to build a tic-tac-toe game using React hooks. Now what is peculiar about this video is that this video comes straight from the React docs, but in the React docs they have created the tic-tac-toe game using class-based components, and I am going to create the same game using functional components or React hooks. So if you are someone who is transitioning from class-based components to functional components, or if you're learning React afresh, this video is gonna be very helpful for you because React hooks is the modern way of learning React. So without wasting any time, let's get started. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell icon so that you don't miss any of our videos. Now before we start coding, let me show you what are we going to build exactly. So here you can see we have some boxes and we can click these boxes to place some X and O's, and you can see that if the X matches in one line, you can see that we get the message winner is X, and we also have a history of moves so that we can go back in time and we can see all of our moves, and also we can change any of our move at any certain point of time. So for example, if I went to move 2 and here if I pressed this instead of this box, if I press here, you can see that the history refreshes itself and the new history reloads. So this is what we are going to implement, all of this in React hooks. So let's get started. So here as usual I'm using my VS Code text editor along with the Chrome browser, and here I have run the npx create react app command, and I have cleaned up all the test files and the report web vitals file, and I have also created 3 components: board.js, game.js and square.js. And as you can see, the index.js contains the default file, and the app.js is completely empty. Similarly, app.css is also completely empty. Now let's first go into the square.js, because this is the component which is responsible for rendering these squares, and these squares are nothing but some buttons. So let's code this. So here we'll say const square is equal to, let's create a function like this. This should be caps lock, and here we'll say return button like this, and inside the button we'll have the value, that is the X and O's. So let's say value here, and also while when we click on these buttons, it should do something, right? It should render these X and O's. So here we'll say on click, and the way we add on click or any other event in React is we write on click, and then we can create an anonymous function. We can either pass a reference to the function, that is the name of the function without the end parenthesis, or we can just create an anonymous function. So here we are going to create this anonymous function, and here we'll say square click. So let's create a function square click like this. Now we don't have this square click function and we don't have this value, so we will receive this square click function and the value as props. So here we're going to say square click as well as value like this. Now let's export this. Now you must have seen import React from React, and I'm not doing that because I'm using React version 17, and with the introduction of React version 17, that import React from React is not required. So we can directly write the function and just export the function to use it in any other file. Now after our basic square is complete, let's create the board.js. So inside the board.js, again, let's create a function. So we'll say const board is equal to, I'm using the arrow function syntax, and again here we'll say return. So now we'll create a function to render our squares. So let's create the function render square. So here we'll say const render square, and this should receive a parameter I, and here we will render the square. So we can say return square like this. Now you can see that we had two props, so value and square click. So we're going to pass the value. We'll say value is equal to, and this will be the value of the particular square. Now we're going to store these X and O's in an array, and we are going to pass the individual value of the array in the button value. So here we'll say square I like this, and from where the square will come, just hang on, I'll let you know. So just for now, just understand that we have an array of 9 which we'll create in future, and we are passing one value of the array to the button value here. So here you can see that inside the button that value will be shown. So that is what we are going to do. So value is equal to square I, and also we have the other prop which is the square click function. So let's create the square click function. So here we'll say square click, and this will be again an anonymous function with the parameter I. So here we'll say board click. Let me just word wrap, okay, I like this. Now we don't have this board click function and this squares array yet, but we are going to create that, or we are going to receive them from props. So don't worry about that, but just understand that we are rendering the square with the value of an array which we are going to create, and the function, the square click function, is what will be executed when we click on the individual squares, and that will in turn execute the board click function. Okay, let's close it. So now inside the return statement, let's create a div with a class of board like this, and we'll use these classes while we'll add the CSS. Now inside this div, we need to call this render square function 9 times to create these 9 squares. So you have two options. You can either call the render square function 9 times with the arguments 0 to 9, or you can run a loop. So we are going to run the loop. So here we are going to create an array with 3 elements like this, and then we are going to run the map function. Now map is a higher order function, so it will take a function again, and inside this we'll say element and index like this. Now since we are not using the element, that's why I have put an underscore before that, okay, and we will use the index. I'll tell you how. And inside this again we'll create a div. So we'll say board row like this, and again we'll insert curly braces. Now this should also be in curly braces, because to insert JSX inside the return statement we need to add curly braces like this. Okay, now inside this div here we will create another array. So we'll say array, first we'll use a spread operator, and then array and 3 dot map. If you don't know what is this spread operator, I have made a complete video on the spread operator. You can go and watch. The link will be somewhere in the I button above. Now again there will be a map function, and inside the map we can put the element like this, and then we'll create a curly brace like this, and then we can say return render square like this. Now inside the render square function we need to have the argument from 0 to 8, okay, for 9 squares, so 0 to 8. So for that let's create a variable. So we'll say let count like this, and in here we'll say count plus plus. Okay, and we need to initialize this, so we'll say count 0. Okay, like this, and here we will pass the count as the argument inside the render square, so we'll say count like this. Or actually we have this count 0, and here the count becomes 1, and we need to pass the arguments from 0 to 8, so we can do count minus 1 like this. Now you can see that we are calling the render square function 9 times from 0 to 9, because we have two loops of 3 elements each. Both of the arrays have 3 elements, so 3 into 3, 9. So the loop runs 9 times, and each time the value of count increases from 0 to 8. Now we also need to pass a key prop. So whenever we run a loop and we render some of these HTML elements or the JSX elements, we need to add a key prop. So here we'll say key. Now the index should not be used as the key prop. You should, in the production environment, you should use UUID or something like that, like ID number or something as the key prop. But here we don't have any issue using the index, because we are not deleting or reordering these boxes. These boxes are going to be static, right? So we can use the index as the key prop safely. But in most cases, we will never use the index as the key prop. But for the purpose of this tutorial, it is fine. Now here again, we are rendering the square 9 times, so we need to use the key prop. And again, since the square is not changing, we can say key is equal to I, like this. Now we don't have this bold click function, and we don't have this square array. So again, we will receive those as props. So here we'll say square and bold click like this. And we also need to import this square component. So we need to say import square from square dot slash square like this, and we can export our board component like this. So now our square component is ready, and our board component is also ready. Okay, here we can see that there's a warning array.map expects a return value. Exactly. So we need to return this div. So instead of this curly braces, it should be normal parenthesis like this. And we'll change this brace also like this. And now you can see that warning is gone. And now we are returning this div, and inside this div we are having a map function again, which is returning the render square function, and which is in turn returning the square component. And the square components are the buttons which we are going to use, which will have the value from our square array, which we will get as the props, and it will, when we click on these squares, it will call the bold click function with the argument I, which is from 0 to 8. So every time we will click on the individual squares, we will know which square has been clicked due to this I argument here. Okay? Now, if all of this is clear, now again we can see that we have some errors, and we can see that we have this error here. So let's remove this, and this should make everything work fine. Okay, now let's make the game component, and let's render everything onto the screen, and let's see how the code looks like. Now let's get onto our game component. So here inside the game component, again we'll make a function. So we'll say const game is equal to like this. Now let's export this as well. So we'll say export default game like this. Now inside the game component, let's return a div with a class of game like this, and here we are going to say game board, and we'll have another div with a class name of game info like this. Now inside the game board, we are going to render the board component, and you can see that we need to import the board component as well. In my case, it has been auto imported, and in the board component we need to pass two props. So you can see that we need to have an array, that is square array, and a function, board click function. So we are going to say in the game component, we are going to say square is equal to, here we will have the square array, and we also need to have a function board click. So we'll say board click is equal to, and here we'll create a function handle click. Okay, handle click like this. Let me word wrap this. Let me close this so we can have more space, and we can close this. So now we have the board component ready, and inside the square, you know that we are going to create an array. So we'll have an array with 9 elements. Okay, so with 9 elements like this, and we are going to create this array later. So right now I'm just doing this for representation purposes. So I'll say just fill and null, so that we have an array of 9 elements with null as each of its values. Now inside the game info, we want the turns. So here we will have turns indicator. So it will indicate whose turn in this, like next player. Okay, and we also want the history moves. So here we'll say history moves. Okay, let's comment this out because we are going to create this later. And here we will create a handle click function. So we'll say const handle click like this. Okay, now render everything on our screen and let's see whether this works. Inside the terminal, you can say npm start like this, and just wait for a while, and it will start our development server. And here you can see that our development server is ready. Now we cannot see anything on the screen because we have not yet added our game component to our app. So let's go to the app component, and here let's import the game component, game from ./game like this. Now let's first add an h1. So we'll say h1 tic-tac-toe, and here we will say game like this. And you can see that we have these 9 buttons, okay, the 9 squares which we have created. And you can see that here if I add some value, instead of using this value, if I add something like x, you can see that we have x in all of these squares. Or if we add o, you can see that we have O's in all of these values. Now let's add some CSS so that these squares look like a tic-tac-toe board. So inside our app.css, let's go into the app.css, and here first we will say, we'll select everything and we'll say margin is 0, padding 0, and box sizing to border box like this. Now inside the square.js, you can see that okay, we have not added any class, so let's add a class name Okay, let's add a class name of square like this. Now inside the app.css, let's target this square class, and here we can say height to 50 pixels, width 250 pixels, like this. Let's add some margin of 20 pixels. We don't want this background, so we'll say background to /fff. Okay, we don't want this margin here. This should not be here. Now let's change the border. So we'll say border 1px solid, and let's set the color to gray, or probably a darker version of this, 999. That should be fine. Yeah, that's great. Now let's increase the font size as well. So we'll say font size, and here we'll say 32px, and we'll also set the font weight to bolder like this. Okay, now this looks like a tic-tac-toe board. Now we also want to set the float to left. Okay, now this will turn everything into a single row, and don't worry, we are going to fix this. So here you can see that inside the game component we have these two divs, so the game board and the game info. So if you turn the game div into a flex box, the squares will be shrink to left. So let's do that, and hopefully that should fix the issue. So we'll say dot game, and if we say display flex like this, and you can see now we have this tic-tac-toe board. Okay, now let's add some interactivity to this board. So we can say dot square, and on hover I want the cursor to be pointer, and we also want the background to be DDD like this. Now let's add some margin and padding. So in here we will target this game board div. So here we are going to say dot game board, and here we are going to say margin to 20px, and or rather we can increase it to 30px like this. Refresh, and you can see that we have some margin here. Also we can place this tic-tac-toe at the center, so we can say h1, and we can say text line to center like this. And that is all for the basic component. And also we can do one more thing. We can add, let's uncomment this, and we can say next player like this. We will change this dynamically. I'm doing it just for the purpose of CSS. Let's uncomment this as well, and this will not be piece, but this should actually be, you can see, an ordered list. So here we are going to create an ordered list. So here we'll say OL like this, and inside this we'll have allies, and inside that we'll have buttons, okay, like this, and we'll have moves. So move one like this, and let's copy this 2 more times, so we can say like this. So it will be something like this. Now let's go to the app.css file, and here this is the game info class. So let's take the game info class. So let's say game info, and now we can set the margin top to 50px like this, or rather it should be 30px. Okay, now let's add some spacing to this as well. So inside the game you can see that here we can add a class name of status, and here we can add a class name of history like this. And for the status we can say font weight, font size to 20 pixels. Okay, let's add the font weight and let's set it to bold like this. Let's add some padding to 20px like this. That's great. Now inside the history, so we can say dot history, and here we can say padding to 20px. We can also target these buttons, so we'll say dot history button, and here we can say padding to 5px like this. And now it looks good. Now we can also add some spacing between these buttons, so we can say dot history, and in the LIs we can say padding to 3px like this. That's great. Now let's reduce this padding, so we can say padding to 10px like this. So 10px is the top padding and 20px is the left and right padding. And we can also reduce this padding, so we can have this as 3px as well. Yeah, now this looks good. Now everything else is set up. We can also, what we can do is we can set the top padding as 0 here like this. So now everything is set up and we can now start to create the game logic. So let's go on to our game.js, and here you can see that we have already created the board, and inside the board we have already created the square component. Now inside the game component we need to have this square array, and we need to implement this handle click function, and we also need to create a way so that we know that one player wins. Okay, now before we start coding the game logic, we need to understand a few things. Now we can already appreciate that we need to have some variables to store the values of x and o's, and you know that variable will be in form of an array which will have the values of x and o's, right? Apart from that, since we need to create the history moves, we need to create a timeline, so we also need to have an array of all the moves at a particular point of time. So the way it will look is, so it will have an array like this. So there will be an array, and inside the array we'll have some objects, okay, like this. So this will be step 1, this will be step 2, and it will hold all the values of the boxes during the step 1. So it will have null, 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 and x and o. For example, if I pressed x here, okay, so it will hold x and null for all of the rest of the boxes. Now the next person places O here. So the second step will have X and O and null as other values. So it will be something like what you can see on the screen, right? Apart from that, we need to check whose turn in this. So if X has placed, so the next turn is of O, and after that the next turn will be of X. So we need to have a variable for that. And we also need to see on which step number we are at, right? So for example, if we clicked on this move 1 or move 2 or whatever position we clicked on, we need to check at what step we are on currently, right? So we'll create 3 variables. One to create the history of all our moves, and the second one to check whose turn is this, and the third one to check on what step number are we. And the way we create variables in React is through the useState hook. Okay, and now let's import the useState hook. So we are going to say import useState from React, like this. Now inside the game function, we are going to say const history comma set history is equal to useState, like this. Now the way useState works is the useState returns an array with exactly 2 elements, and you can see that here we are doing array destructuring or array unpacking. And when this useState function returns that array with 2 elements, the first element is the name of the variable and the second element is the function to set that variable, right? So here this is the useState, it's returning an array with 2 elements, and we are setting the value of the function as well as the variable inside history and set history. So history is our variable and the set history is the function to set this history variable. You can use any name, of course, you want, but this is the convention. The first name is of the variable and the second is set plus the name of the variable. Now inside the useState function, we can pass an argument to initialize the history variable. Now we need to have an array here, and inside the array we'll have an object with square, and the squares will contain the array. So here we can say array of 9 elements, and we'll say dot fill with null, like this. So now we have this array with one object right now, and it has the squares key with the array of 9 elements, all places filled with null values. Now let's create another variable, and that will be x is next. So when x is next will be true, the term will be of x, and when x is next is false, the term will be of O. Now x is next as well as set x is next, like this. We can set this to small x like this. It doesn't matter, but this is the convention. Then we can say useState, and we can initialize this with true. So every time when we start the game, the x will start. Okay. Now the next we need to create is step number, like this, and a function to set this step number, like this. And here we'll say useState, and we will set the step number to 0. Okay, so at the start of the game, the step number is 0. Now let's implement this handle click function. Now you can see inside this board component, when we are calling this board click function, we are passing an argument I. So inside the handle click function, so here you can see that board click is equal to handle click. So inside the handle click, we need to have the parameter I. So for that, we need to have a function with I as its argument, and we need to call the handle click with I. So here, when we'll call this board click function, it will go here and it will pass the I here, and the handle click will be called with the argument I. Now inside this, we'll pass the parameter I like this. So inside the handle click, we'll create another variable past moves, and that will be equal to history dot slice 0 to step number plus 1. So whenever we click on these buttons, we will change the step number. Okay, we will implement that later, but I'm just telling you how it will work. So whenever we'll click on these buttons, we will change the step number, and that's why we need to create a variable past moves in which we will store the portion of the history till that particular step number. So from 0 till that particular step number, we are storing in past moves so that we can refresh our history whenever we want. Now we also need a variable to store the current move. So here we'll say const current is equal to, that will be an array from past moves, and from the past moves we want the last element, which will be our current move. So we'll say step number like this dot squares. That is our current move. Now what we can do is we can say current I. Now this handle click is receiving this I, and this I is nothing but numbers from 0 to 8. So here you can see that we are passing the numbers 0 to 8 from count to board click, and this board click is getting called in the game, which is using and which is then passing that numbers from 0 to 8 to the function handle click. So this current I will be equal to some value, that is X or O. So we can check if X is next is true, that means the value is X, otherwise it is O, like this. And when we have set the value of current, what we can do is we can store these values inside history. So we'll say set history. We need to have all the past moves as well as squares to current, like this, and everything will be in an array like this. So now what's happening? We are storing all the past moves as well as we are storing the current move. So every time our squares array is going to change, and we are going to store that array as a new object with the squares property. So that is how we are setting the history. Apart from setting the history, we also need to change the turn. So we are going to say set X is next to what it was, the opposite of what it was before. Okay, so we'll take an argument prev or the parameter prev, and then we're going to change it. Now we also need to set the step number. So we can say set step number, and that will be the length of our past moves array, because I'll tell you why. So here we will say past moves dot length. like this. Now here you might argue that it should be history.length, okay, but it cannot be history.length because when we'll click on these buttons and we'll change our step number, we want our history to refresh. If we'll set here history.length, then even if we click on these buttons, the step number will not change because history is containing all of the steps till that particular point of time. So that's why we need to have past moves.length as our step number. And don't worry if it is not clear right now, because it will be more clear when we'll implement these moves right here. Okay, so let's move further. And now you can see that if we click on these boxes, we should be getting, okay, we are not getting the value because here we need to pass history step number dot squares like this. Now if we click on these boxes, you can see that we are getting our X and O's. Okay, so that is great. So let's move ahead and create the history functionality. So for that we'll create const moves is equal to, we'll do history dot map. So we're going to map over history and we are going to list all the steps here. So we are going to say history.map. Now again, map will take a function. The first argument is the element, so we don't need that, and the next argument is the index, so we are interested in the index like this. Now we are going to check the moves, so we'll say const description is equal to if we have some elements. So if the index is more than 0, so if the index exists, what we are going to do is we are going to say go to that particular index. So we'll say go to move like this. We are using the template literal syntax, and if the move is 0, that means if the move does not exist, that means we need to go onto the game start, right? So we'll say go to game start like this. Now let's return some allies, so we'll say return, and here we'll create an ally, and here we need to create the button, and here we'll have the description and the button value like this. Now this button will have a onClick method, and here we need to call a function jump to, which we'll create later. So let's do that. Let's create an anonymous function here, and here let's call a function jump to with the argument move. Okay, and we will create this jump to function later. So let me just write the definition so that it doesn't error out. Jump to is equal to a function like this. Okay, now this ally and these buttons are these allies and these buttons. So instead of these dummy allies, I'm going to remove all of this, and we are going to say moves here like this. And now you can see that we have this go to game start, and if you click on these buttons, you can see that our moves are increasing, right? Now if you click on these moves, nothing will happen, of course, because we have not implemented the jump to function yet. So now let's implement this jump to function. Okay, so this jump to will receive the parameter step. So that is the step on which we want to go to. That is, so whatever the move is, we want to go onto that particular step, right? So that's why we are receiving the parameter as step. Now inside this, we need to set the step number to step like this, and Now here we'll say, and we also need to check whose turn is this. Now when the step is 0, at that time we had the turn of x, right? So every time the step is even, we'll have x turn, and every time we'll have the step as odd, we'll have O's turn, right? So here we can say set x is next. I think this should be okay, this is right. And here we're going to check step whether it's divisible by 2, and if it is divisible by 2, x is next will be true. Okay, now inside the next player, for now we need to show who's right now you can see that this is not changing, so let's create a function to change the status as well. So here we'll say const evaluate status like this, and here we'll say let status. Now we also need to check the winner here, so we'll say const winner is equal to calculate winner. Now this is a function which we have not yet created, but we'll create to check our winner, right? So we'll say calculate winner like this, and we are going to say status is equal to, so if winner exists, what we want to do is we need to show the winner. So here we are going to say winner is winner like this, and otherwise if the winner does not exist, that means we need to show the next move. So here we are going to say next player, and we're going to check if x is next is true. If x is next is true, that means we are going to say x, or otherwise we are going to say O, like this. Now the calculate winner is not defined, and that's why it's erroring out. So let's just write the definition of calculate winner so that it doesn't error out. So here we can say const calculate winner like this, and now it doesn't error out. And here what we can do is we can return status. So we'll say return status like this, and in here instead of this dummy text we're going to delete this, and we will write evaluate status here. Okay, now you can see that if we click here, you can see that our next player changes. We can see that we have our history in place, so you can go back in time and check whose move was that. Okay, and if we click anywhere here in between, you can see that the moves disappear and the next move appears. And that's why I was telling here that you need to create the set step number as past moves.length, not history.length, and you can just change to history.length and see what error it gives, and you will automatically understand why we need to do past moves.length here. Now let's implement our calculate winner function. So inside the calculate winner, what we need to do is we need to understand when the player will win. So let me open this pen here. So you can see that if this value is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Now the player will win whenever we'll have the lines 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 0, 3, 6, 1, 4, 7, 2, 5, 8, or 2, 4, 6 and 0, 4, 8. So whenever the values in these squares will be equal, the player will win, right? So let's create a function to check all of this. So inside the calculate winner function, we will receive the squares, that is the current squares, and in here we will first create the lines. So we'll say const lines is equal to, so first is, as you can see, 0, 1, 2. So we'll say 0, 1, 2. The next we have 3, 4, 5. Next we have 6, 7, 8. Then 0, 3, 6. The vertical line, right? 0, 3, 6. Next is 1, 4, and 7. Then we will have 2, 5, and 8. And then we'll have the diagonal lines, that is 0, 5, and 8. So we will have 0, 5, 8. Or sorry, 0, 4, and 8. So 0, 4, and 8 it should be. And similarly, it should be 0, 1, 2, 4, and 6. So it should be 2, 4, and 6, like this. Now we'll loop over the values from the current square and we'll check whether the values satisfy these particular lines. So we'll say for let I is equal to 0, I less than lines dot length, then I plus plus, and here we want to say const a comma b comma c, that is we are using the array destructuring, and we will take the values from lines I like this. Okay, and now we'll check if squares a and squares a is equal to squares b as well as squares a is equal to squares c. If all of this happens, that means that the player wins, right? So what we want is, we want to return the value in the square a. Okay, squares a. Okay, like this. Now whenever we call calculate winner, we need to calculate the current step, right? So for that we can use our history array. So here you can see, here while we are calling the calculate winner, we can do history step number dot squares, like this. Now if we do like this, and if we place x here, you can see that we get the winner x, right? So you can see that our game is coming in shape. We have one issue, that is, if we click here, we are able to click the O, but we should not be able to click once we have already clicked on a particular box or once we have won. So if we click again, you can see that the box changes, but we should not be able to do this, right? So for that, we'll go back to our handle click function, and inside the handle click function, we'll create a if check. So we'll say if the current exists, okay? So if we have some value in current I, or we are getting some value from calculate winner, so calculate winner, and we can pass the current here. So if we have some value in current I, or if we have some or if we are getting some value from calculate winner, that is the winner is already declared, we just want to return. Okay, we don't want these things to happen. So now if you refresh this, and if you click here, click here, click here, click here, click here, and click here, you can see that X is the winner, and we are not able to click on these boxes, as well as we are not able to change the value of these boxes. So if X is clicked, you can see that even if I click here, nothing is happening. So we are not able to change the value from the particular square. And we can go back in time, and we can play this the way we want. So this is how you implement the tic-tac-toe game in React hooks. One more thing which you should know is that tic-tac-toe is one of the most frequently asked interview questions. If you're appearing for a React developer interview, they might ask you to build a tic-tac-toe game quickly. So you must understand the nitty-gritties of this game and how the logic of the game works. I hope this video would have helped you, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. And that's all for today's video. See you in the next one. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.